I'm Ed Magwan, and you're listening to WokeUpPH, where we talk social issues relevant to today's youth. This week, for the first time since the 2019 midterm elections, COMELEC will finally open up voters' registration. This is something many of today's youth have been waiting for since the disappointment they felt last May. Today, we speak with COMELEC Spokesperson James Jimenez to talk about voters' education and registration, the youth vote, and what happened in the 2019 midterm elections. Spokesperson Jimenez, welcome to WokeUpPH.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so great to have you, sir. This is a topic that I was really chasing after for a while because I knew this was relevant to so many of today's youth.
Sure.
And just really to kick things off, I wanted to go into a topic. It's very specific. It's the power of the youth vote.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of talk about, especially in the midterm elections, like how the youth vote is so powerful, like how the youth vote is really going to be, in a way, like maybe not, if not the majority, like the plurality in terms of the age ranges of the number of voters. And can you just quickly describe to us, I guess, who is the youth vote and how big is their power this 2022 presidential election?
Well, the definition of the youth vote basically depends on how you define the youth.
Right.
I mean, different agencies define it differently. Dito sa COMELEC, what we say is if you're up to 30 years old, 18 to 30, that's considered a youth. And that block is about 22 million strong. But we also, if we're being, less strict about it, you could also consider the youth as including all the way up from the 15-year-olds
Right.
who are voting in the Sangguniang Kabataan elections, all the way up to maybe even 40.
And 15-year-olds will be able to vote come 2022, right?
Yes, they will. I mean, if they're the right age. But in general, when you're talking about the youth vote, again, it depends on what your parameters are. But in general, and strictly speaking, we refer to people from the age of 18 to 30.
Mm-hmm.
But even then, that's already about 22 million. Can you just imagine how much bigger it is if you're going to include, say, what other people would call young adults,
Right.
who are also still technically the youth, right? So it's a huge block. And to be honest about it, they really are the prime movers of the elections.
Mm-hmm.
They're the ones who essentially set the trends in terms of who wins and who loses.
Right.
So they are very powerful, except that sometimes they don't have their act together. They don't vote as a block. There are a lot of youth, malakas ang voting power nila, simply because marami sila, but they do not vote as a block, which makes it a little tricky when you're talking about
Right.
how they affect the elections.
And so when you say this 22 million, is that 22 million eligible voters from the youth, or is that like the total youth?
No, that's the eligible voters. From the
Right.
youth.
So when we're talking about the youth, it's actually
We're
much,
not even
much
talking
bigger.
about the youth. Yeah,
Yeah.
The youth as a demographic, much larger. Than
much
that.
much larger.
Yeah.
All right. So, sir, when you say what I want to look at is that amongst the youth, is it specific to that demographic that there is a low voter registration amongst them?
No, in fact, they are very active in registration.
Okay.
Again, the problem is not engagement. The problem is the quality of engagement.
Okay.
It's not so much that they don't participate. There was a time when there was a problem with that. Voter apathy, we used to call it, and all of that, or the apathy of the youth. But starting around 2013 to 2016, that sort of changed. In fact, I would go back even further to 2010.
Okay.
When the elections were automated, it drew a lot of the youth in.
Okay.
Because it was not business as usual. And after the 2010 elections, people were seeing that the bailiwicks were dissolving. I mean, people who had been winning with one hand tied behind their back suddenly realized that they couldn't do that anymore. The concept of the political stronghold
Right.
sort of disappeared, and it sort of empowered the youth to an extent that at that point we started seeing an uptick in the engagement of the youth. But what hasn't kept pace is how the youth have been voting.
Right.
Again, it would probably be unfair to say that the youth are not intelligent voters, or that they're voting for the wrong people, simply because there is no universal criteria for what makes a good candidate.
Correct.
We all have our definition of what makes a good politician, after all. But again, there are some objective measures, and by those objective measures, sometimes the youth are not voting because they believe in a person.
Okay.
Rather, they've been mobilized. They've been taken to the polls for whatever reason. But sometimes the people they vote for don't enact policies that reflect the interests of the youth, which makes me question whether or not, again, the youth are taking a principled stand.
Right. So it's not more on. So what you're saying, sir, it's not more on we look at the end result of who they're voting for, but perhaps what we should be looking at is their discernment process.
Yes.
In terms of deciding,
in terms of choosing who to vote for. Again, the tendency I feel is that they're being used as cannon fodder.
Okay.
You know, para lang magkaroon tayo ng warm bodies, para lang manalo si ganito.
Right.
Let's trigger the youth, let's activate the youth, let's give them the sugar that they want. You know, let's give them the nice brand, the nice slogan that they can rally around. But in terms of actually dissecting the policy potential or what a candidate stands for, medyo hindi pa tayo umaabot sa ganung punto na masasabi nating maganda ang sitwasyon.
Right, but sir, would you say that has come a long way since, let's say, maybe a decade or 2 decades ago, or it's moving much slower than we'd hoped?
Well, absolutely, it's better than a decade ago, simply because now they're voting.
Okay.
And
okay.
a decade ago, they weren't voting at all. But again, it probably takes a little more work to refine who they vote for or why they vote.
And sir, in terms of the youth, there's a lot of reasons why we have a lot of youth who don't vote. One of the more popular opinions that I'm just one vote. What will that impact make? And could you, sir, help us maybe address this type of thought or concern amongst the youth?
Well, the whole idea of I'm just one vote, how can I affect anything? It only works if you're the only one who thinks like that.
Correct.
But if everyone thinks like that, and if it's as widespread as it is, then you end up with more people thinking they won't affect the outcome than people who believe that they will, and therefore the group that says I'm just one vote, I can't affect anything, ends up being larger than the number of people who actually vote, which means net result, nothing changes. Number one. Number two, saying that I'm just one vote and I won't change a thing, it's like being in a basketball game.
Okay.
You have the ball and you say, I can't make that shot, so I won't try it at all.
Yeah.
So yes, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Sabi mo, wala kang effect kasi isa ka lang, hindi ka bumoto, talagang wala kang epekto, right? It's like saying, I'm never gonna win the lotto, so why buy a ticket? Well, you didn't buy a ticket, so you obviously not gonna win the lotto. So, ganyan yan. It's self-defeating. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's a hole that you're digging for yourself. Kalokohan yan, no? And again, it only works kung ikaw lang nag-iisip ng ganyan. The problem is, hindi lang isang tao ang nag-iisip ng ganyan.
Right.
Usually, maraming nagsasabi ng ganyan. At kung itutuloy-tuloy mo yan at lahat kayo nagsasalita ng ganyan, in the end, mas marami kayong nagpapas kesa dun sa talagang pumunto.
Right. And sir, I guess for a lot of today's youth, they were born in a time where they always had an election. Like, you know, they were born into a democracy. They've always experienced elections. Every 3 years there would be a midterm. Every 6 years there would be a presidential election.
Sure.
But if you could just, to help put this into perspective, that what is the history of our elections here in the Philippines? Just a quick rundown so that people can understand that, hey, we didn't always have an election, and perhaps it's something at this point we already take for granted.
Oh, we absolutely take elections for granted, especially the young ones, especially the ones who sort of like became aware of the world after 1986.
Yes.
So for these generations, elections are something that they expect to see. that they can gripe about as being, elections na naman, etc. But there was a point in our history when, even though we did have elections, those elections were bogus. Those elections were completely, compromised. The problem with that was that in this country, the authoritarians, only one authoritarian, to be honest, felt that he needed elections to give his despotism a patina of legitimacy. There was this style that they used to call it. They called it the constitutional dictatorship. It was an attempt to dress up the whole idea of dictatorship in a way that would make it seem acceptable to the outside world, to the people here. And part of that makeup, part of that camouflage, was the holding of regular elections. So yes, elections were regularly held. In fact, pre-1986, elections were mandatory. You needed to vote. That's why people in the COMELEC would ride around in garbage trucks.
Right.
This was pre-86. And we would go into the sitios, and we would go into the homes and drag people out to vote. Literally drag people out to vote. Because they needed to vote. If they didn't vote, they would face criminal charges, etc., etc. So there was that one aspect. Number one, elections were mandatory. And while that may be a seductive idea to some people now, you have to understand that in application, hindi lahat ng tao excited bumoto. So what do you do with people who don't want to vote? You end up forcing them to vote.
Right.
So it's not as clear cut as people say. Hindi, kailangan dapat mandatory ang boto para lahat bumoboto. Hindi naman lahat ganyan mag-isip eh.
Correct.
Some people really don't want to vote. And again, on paper, in principle, it probably sounds nice, but in application, you end up forcing people to vote. Okay? So that's one difference from then and now. Second, once the voting was done, okay, it became irrelevant who people voted for. Why? Because the instruments of state, not the election commission,
right?
The people who
the
were,
ruling
people who were taking orders from the despot, basically took the boxes that had the voice of the people and replaced them with boxes that were stuffed with the proper votes, meaning to say votes that would give the correct winning margin to whoever they were pushing for.
The result they wanted.
The result they wanted, in other words. So the elections were not free. The elections were not trustworthy. The elections were bogus. And in the end, even if you did have an opposition, it was essentially an approved opposition. It was the opposition personalities that the administration allowed to win. Again, all in the service of giving the dictatorship this appearance of legitimacy.
Right.
So while the opposition figures were legitimately in the opposition, the only reason they were there was that they were allowed to sit there. So it's it's almost a kind of tokenism that was going on there. So after 1986, that all changed. After 1986, the elections literally became a free-for-all. And you had even people in the administration taking chances on losing. And lose they did. Many times over the years since 1986, the pattern has always been the administration faces a stiff challenge.
Right.
The challenger wins the election. There's a peaceful transition of power. And then the challenger enjoys a time in the sun. And then in the next election, they're unseated and replaced with a brand new government because they somehow didn't, satisfy the people enough. But the pattern since 1986 has always been that we've had peaceful transitions of power.
Right.
There was one aberration, yung EDSA 2.
Yeah.
Diba?
Yeah.
And we paid for that. The president who sat after EDSA 2 was practically paralyzed because nothing she could do would ever meet with any sort of public approval. because at one point she grabbed power through an extra constitutional procedure, and we've seen it time and time again, and unfortunately that sort of thinking has led people to accept that there's a second way of getting into power, which is by totally ignoring the vote of the people, and doing the extra constitutional route. But overall, overall, the fact that we've had a remarkably steady record of elections,
Right.
and a remarkably consistent series of transfers of power, that has contributed to a lack of appreciation for the elections.
Right.
People just don't see it in the proper context, and for them it has become something of a burden, or in some cases, especially for the more cynical ones, just another means of perpetuating people in power. But again, look back and see how often power has changed hands from administration to opposition. The opposition becomes administration, and the new opposition becomes the next administration. And it's been that way.
Flip-flops all throughout.
All throughout. We haven't had a situation where one party or one political color
Right.
has held sway for more than one term.
And sir, do you think this do you think this is a big factor into why perhaps Filipinos are not seeing the change they want to see, because each succeeding quote unquote opposition and then back to the administration, then they
Sure.
kind of like erase what each other has been able to do more on versus like continuing
Well,
projects?
that's certainly contributory, but the problem is not the change in administration. The problem is in the people. Look, I can be in the opposition and still accept that some projects are good, and still continue them. Ang problema is that there is a tendency wholesale to reject everything that the previous administration has done, and to reinvent the wheel every single time,
Which wastes a lot of time.
which wastes a lot of time. It loses whatever groundwork has already been done,
Right.
simply because you don't want it to be said that this project was started by my political opponent. Again, there's really nothing wrong with the reins of power changing hands every 6 years. What's wrong is that when the reins are handed over to the new person rejects wholesale everything that was done before.
Right. And sir, just to give some information, why is it, like for an individual listening to this podcast right now, why is it so important for them to vote, and what does their vote represent fundamentally?
Your vote essentially represents your participation in the governance process. A lot of people think when they vote, a lot of people sort of stop there. They say, "Oh, na vote ko si Ed, and Ed is now president. Bahala na si Ed." Okay, that's the norm. That's the average way of thinking. But think of it this way. Let's say the coming elections is a barangay elections, right? It's barangay. So you say, gusto ko maging barangay chairman si Ed because he's a cool person, anak siya ng kapatid ko, or anak siya ng kaibigan ko, etc.
Right.
But understand this. The barangay chairman is also responsible for garbage collection in your town, in your village. The barangay chairman is also responsible for peace and order. Pag may namatay dyan, malamang the barangay chairman fell down on the job. Diba?
Right.
Hindi niya ginawa yung trabaho niya. Hindi niya kayo sinecure. Pag nagkaroon ng El Nino na naman, and El Nino is coming more frequently, wala kayong patubig dyan. Wala kayong poso. Dahil hindi yan ginawa ng barangay chairman. So, in other words, the barangay chairman carries a whole deal of responsibilities. Lots of responsibilities. But beyond that, because these are macro problems. Say you, as an individual, you want to open a business in your barangay. You want to open, say, a small ukay-ukay in your barangay. You're gonna need a barangay clearance. And that barangay clearance is only gonna come from the barangay. So you put a person in there that you don't know,
Right.
You put a person in there that you haven't tested, that you know, likely hindi mo kilala, then you're putting your means of livelihood in the hands of a person you don't know, right? What's even worse is because you let someone else vote for these people, the people who will end up in power, you're essentially giving up your part of that equation, giving up your participation in that process. Now, think of it this way. What if hindi ka nag-participate, hindi ka bumoto, tapos yung kapitbahay mo na nilason yung aso mo becomes the barangay chairman? What you gonna do? Wala na.
You're left powerless.
You're left powerless. You're stuck. Diba? And this person doesn't like you. Good luck getting a permit from him for work.
Right.
So that's 3 years wasted.
Right.
Simply because hindi ka lumaban. Now, obviously, you're just one vote. Tama ka. You're just one vote. And obviously, it is possible na kahit na bumoto ka, manalo pa rin yung kumag,
Right.
yung kagalit mo. Pero at least may ginawa ka.
Yeah.
Diba? Lumaban ka. Whereas, pag hindi ka lumaban, naghintay ka lang ng may mananalong kakampi mo, para kang si Juan Tamad. Nakanganga ka lang, naghihintay kang mahulog yung bayabas sa bibig mo. That's not gonna happen.
Right.
Or if that happens, malamang, by the time mahulog yung bayabas, bungi ka na. Right? So, kailangan talaga mag-action ka. Kasi, pag hindi ka kumilos, pag hindi ka bumoto, wala kang ma-achieve for sure. Now, again, it's very important, understand that elections are not just about putting people into positions of authority. Elections are about giving them power over your life. That's the bottom line, and that's something that makes people uncomfortable. Yung barangay chairman, you think I'm joking about power over your life? If that barangay chairman fingers you or identifies you as a drug addict,
Right.
simply because he's not liking you, simply because he's not your friend, well, we all know what happens to drug addicts nowadays, don't we?
And sir, allegedly that does happen.
Yeah, exactly. So, I guess we're supposed to say allegedly, but again, it's the common experience. In my barangay, I've heard of people being identified as barangay addicts who've disappeared. Right? I'm not gonna let that happen to myself.
Correct.
I'm not gonna let that happen to my family, and neither should you. So that's the reality of the situation. Electing someone into office doesn't just give him a nice desk. Gives that person, boy or girl, male or female, power over your life,
Right.
literally. So think about it very well. I mean, susuko mo na lang ba yun ng ganun-ganun?
Right. It's really something I feel not a lot of Filipinos actually think of in that lens.
No, they don't.
Because even if you don't think about it in a more noble way of like the betterment of the collective society, just as the example you gave is that's specific to you as an individual, as a Filipino.
Yeah. You know what? That's what we do here in the Education and Information Department. We understand the nobility of elections.
Right.
I mean, if we were to talk about that, then we would be the choir preaching to the choir, right? I mean, pointless. Nagkakaintindihan na tayo eh. We all know that elections are noble, etc. The challenge for voter education, I think, really, is to present a good value argument.
Right.
Why is this important? And a good value argument is not one that says it's important because democracy.
Right.
It's like saying world peace, man, in a beauty contest. It doesn't work. It's just wala lang.
It works, I guess, maybe for the more educated, but which is
but
a very small percentage.
I wouldn't go that way because I guess everyone understands the whole concept or the whole idea of being free. Ang problema kasi, hindi lang natin nakikita yan doon sa level ng practical. For a lot of people, they don't care. Okay, look. I don't know if you've seen Fiddler on the Roof, but there's a line there that's always stuck with me. It's a peasant asking the rabbi, okay, is there a proper blessing for the Tsar? The Tsar. This happens in Russia, right? So they're a small town in a small corner of Russia, and so this peasant is asking the rabbi, the priest of the church, is there a blessing that we should pray for the Tsar in faraway Moscow, far away Moscow?
Right.
And the rabbi goes, well, the blessing should be, God bless the Tsar, God bless and keep the Tsar far away from us. So basically, a lot of people, especially at the barangay level, they never feel government. They don't feel the presence of authority, and they like it that way.
Okay.
So why would an argument about democracy and the value of freedom really have an impact?
Right.
It really might not. So the challenge again is to bring it down to the level of practical, to the level of how will this affect me personally?
Which is something universal.
Which
for
is
all Filipinos.
exactly, it's universal. Again, like I said, you step out of your house, may basura dyan, sino may kasalanan yan? Barangay mo.
Right.
It's simple as that. You don't have to be a fan of democracy for that to be real. You don't have to be a fan of anyone for that to be a factual problem.
Right.
And so you bring it down to that level, then you have a chance of convincing people, yeah, they should vote.
Right. So, sir, to go to a more specific election,
Sure.
I guess the most recent one we had, which is the 2019 midterm elections, what do you have to say about, the disgruntled upper and middle class youth who were shocked to see their candidates who were more progressive in a way have a, overall poor performance?
That was painful to see.
Okay.
That was very painful to see. But it was also not the first time I've seen it. We saw that. We see that every elections.
Right.
Every elections, you have a bunch of people who feel like their candidates could not have lost or should not have lost, and they're casting around for reasons to make sense of the whole thing. But ultimately, elections are won by voters voting.
Right.
Not how many times you've posted a meme, not how many times you've ranted online about how good your candidate is. That doesn't win elections.
Right.
Voters win elections. And this reaction that we're seeing from one side now is the same reaction we saw from the other side when their people lost.
Right.
So it's the same. It's all the same. And it's understandable. It's totally understandable. The stakes were very high, and well, I guess neither side made it easy for the others
Correct.
to like them. There was no attempt to bridge the divide.
Right.
We were so entrenched, the politicians were so entrenched in their positions, they were actually trolling each other.
Like, it was very clear.
Yeah, it was very clear. Like, they were not even attempting, the politicians, they were not even attempting to find a middle path.
Right.
There was from the very beginning, the whole atmosphere was pervaded by the sense that if we win, you lose.
Right.
It's a zero-sum game for a lot of people. And so people reacted as they would in a zero-sum game. Tearing out their hair, oh my God, we lost. Dinaya tayo.
Right.
But again, the objective measure, the number of people who voted for which candidate, it shows that these people won.
Right.
Right now, sort of people have shifted. People are now saying that, well, you should have disqualified them. Again, think about what you're saying.
Right.
If COMELEC had done what they wanted to their candidates, and there was ample reason to do it for both sides,
Right.
they would then shout, no, you're taking unwarranted discretion.
Correct.
So again, it's very easy to blame the referee, and again, it's something that we expect.
Sir, but when you say that, people, these candidates were not so willing to find a middle ground in this
No, they
recent
were not.
midterm elections, but How about, sir, in terms of, because when we talk about bigger issues and maybe human rights, I guess maybe for some candidates there is no middle ground, and something at least I've been able to really evaluate was that I felt that this election was a more, I don't know if you would agree, a more principle-based election versus a personality-based election, or would you say otherwise?
I guess it depends on who's talking, right? I mean,
Right.
For people who do not share the principles of the winners, they will say that it was personality based.
Okay.
They voted for this candidate because he's funny, right? Whatever.
Okay.
But people who on the other side would say, no, we voted for what they stood for. And the people on the other side again will find a disconnect.
Okay.
Simply because they do not share the same values. They do not share the same principles. I think there's lip service to a common set of principles, but how to achieve it, that's where the debate lies.
Right. Okay, sir. To go to a different aspect of the midterm elections, let's talk about the delay in the partial and unofficial results. So this caused a bit of a stir after the voting. I'm sure you were very busy dealing with that.
Yes.
But just to, I guess, there lots of news articles are coming out, some fake, some from our mainstream media. But what caused this, and was it something more preparation could have avoided?
Well, failing to prepare is preparing to fail, is what they say, right?
Okay.
So yes, I guess we could have used a little more forward-looking preparations. I think I would say that in terms of testing the system,
Right.
we could have been a little more thorough, perhaps. And in that sense, yes, it was a failing of the commission, but ultimately it didn't affect the outcome of the
Right.
elections. It didn't delay the outcome of the election, the final resolution
The
of the
official.
elections. All we really lost was for 7 hours the opportunity to have a running total
Right.
put out by unofficial sources.
Right.
That's all. But of course, that's something that people are making hay out of. They're capitalizing
Right.
on that failure. And again, understandable. But ultimately, in terms of standards, you're looking at, did the elections reflect the sentiment of the people? And
Right.
we still feel that it did. But just to address the concern directly, the lack of that unofficial running tally, did it affect the did it affect the reliability of the elections in any way? It affected the credibility, yes, absolutely.
Right.
Because people don't believe it if they don't see it happening, right?
Correct.
But did it affect the reliability of the elections? No, it did not. Why? Because while that lack of information was happening, you look at other sources.
Correct.
Reporters were reporting proclamations. They were reporting the progress of everything else. Ang nawala lang talaga, isang aspeto ng reporting. Pangalawa, because of that, it means that the system was never down.
Okay.
And if the system was never down, then how could anyone use that 7-hour window to affect the outcome? They could not have. Pangatlo, by the time the lack started, the blackout, some people are calling it, started, the results were already in the books.
Okay.
Why? Because the blackout happened with the transmission of results. And remember, according to our process, the way we design things, transmission only begins after the results have been printed out. So literally, the results were already on the books. May print out ka na eh. All that was left was to consolidate it at the various levels.
Right.
But all of the results were already in there. So wala nang changes na magaganap. Just computation na lang. How do you add them all up? But in the end, you had the actual results already on paper, and that could be verified all the way up to the end without resorting to electronic transmission even.
Right.
So the problem, however, is that there is a willful denial of these things. People do not actually listen to this. People who push this narrative, they totally ignore the fact that, again, these three things, that the system was never down, that the results were already in by the time the problem started, and so on. Kasi nga, they're pushing a narrative.
Right.
And that's, again, something that could have been avoided, should have been avoided, if we had only prepared more. Now, why did this happen? This happened because we introduced a new procedure
Okay.
into how we get this information out to the media. Dati kasi, what we would do is, if the results came into this laptop, we would get a USB stick and physically port that data to this laptop, which can now be connected to the media.
Okay.
What we did was we instituted a software program in between these two computers. And so, we tested it a little, ganyan. Oh, it works fine, great. Let's go.
Yeah.
Not anticipating that the volume of data coming into this computer, into the receiving computer, would basically choke the pipeline
Right.
between the receiving computer and the computer that would transmit to the media. So nabulunan ngayon yung pipeline. Again, could that have been prevented if we had been more forward-looking? Yes, absolutely. If we had designed a system that could expand the bandwidth, for lack of a better term, could expand the bandwidth as the need arose, which is something that is done on a regular basis, then we probably would have avoided the problem.
Correct.
But we didn't. So we thought that this rigid pipeline was enough, and it wasn't.
So, as for the COMELEC, sir, aside from maybe what you already mentioned, what were the lessons learned in the midterms that you'll definitely take into 2022, or even the upcoming barangay election?
Well, very few lessons from the electronic side, because obviously barangay elections are manual. But we have learned several lessons. For election management, we've learned that it's very important to take the teachers on a really comprehensive training regime. A lot of times the tendency is to say, alam na ng teacher yan kasi matagal na nilang ginagawa.
Yeah.
But turns out can't always rely on experience, etc. You have to remind them every single time. Not to mention the fact that, of course, the teachers who served 3 years ago may not be the teachers who serve now.
Right.
So ganyan. We've also seen from past elections that it's very, very helpful. It's very beneficial to the voter experience to have all of your partnerships lined up before the elections. Like in the last elections, in the last barangay elections was the first time we actually had DOH representatives in polling places, and as a result, we were able to help, I think, 11 people with health issues right then and there. These are 11 people who would not have received immediate aid had we not done that. And then we did it again in 2019. And from what I heard, we've helped even more people health-wise. We've provided legal assistance to people on the ground, and so on and so forth. And so we're building on these lessons about what it takes to make the experience more shall we say, more convenient for voters, and especially in terms of the emergency accessible polling places. One of the biggest things that we've learned is that we can't rely on the old procedure. Okay, a little bit of context. We wanted to provide accessible polling places for people with disabilities, for pregnant women, senior citizens, and all that. But what we did was we said, well, come to the office before the elections, register your needs, and then say, yeah, I want to go to an APP, accessible polling place. Not a lot of people did that. But on election day, they came. PWD, senior citizens, and they had a difficult time.
Right.
So we had to adjust. We had to create emergency accessible polling places. And we did that in 2016. So we learned essentially from the lessons of the past. And now, emergency accessible polling places are a regular feature.
Right.
So now in 2019, all polling places, all 85,000 polling places had sort of emergency stations where people who didn't tell us that they were needing assistance could come, be assessed right then and there and given the assistance that they needed.
Right.
So we're just going to carry that over into the next elections as well.
Now, sir, a bit of looking forward into future elections. And I want to talk about voter education.
Sure.
Are there any efforts right now from COMELEC, or planned efforts rather, on promoting voters' education?
Yes, absolutely. Voter education goes through a cycle, just like elections. If you're to imagine the elections as a sine wave, then you're having 3-year peaks and then troughs in between 3 years.
It alternates in a way.
Alternate
Yeah,
kami.
yeah.
So kami yung cosine. So ganyan ang itsura natin yan. Now, when you're in between elections, that's when voter education really picks up. In fact, on Wednesday, tomorrow, we're going to kick off our voter education efforts in Porac, Pampanga.
Okay.
In a small community there. We're going to talk to, I think, about 200 people.
Okay.
Key people in that community, and start delivering basic education, basic election education and literacy to them.
And so what does voters' education cover on your end? Is it just the basic act of voting, or do you even cover up to like how to discern?
Yes, absolutely.
On who to vote for?
Voter education right now, here in my office, what we do is we differentiate between voter information and voter education.
Oh,
voter
right.
information is the mechanical information that you need, like when do you register, how do you register, when do you vote, how do you vote, etc. Voter education is what prepares them for the exercise of their right to vote, and that's where we draw the connection between their right to vote and the real world effects of their voting.
Right.
And we do both.
Right. And so I want to talk about personality politics and principle
Sure.
politics. Not on the level of those who are running, but more on the level of you as an individual discerning on who to vote for.
Sure.
And there's been a lot of criticism, some may perhaps would say unwarranted, from the upper middle class to those who are not as well off or living in poverty, that they don't vote based on principles, but they vote based on personality. But in your opinion, is it possible for those living below the poverty line to even, think about things like this when they're living day to day and, thinking of like how they're gonna, feed their family for the next day?
Again, it boils down to what your principles are.
Right.
I mean, for a certain class of people, what's important is generosity, for instance.
Correct.
This is a value. Taking care of the needy, for instance. This is a value.
Right.
And so when they vote for a candidate that they see gives them money, then it's not a vote for a person giving them money, it's a vote for generosity.
Correct.
And that is as principle-based as it gets.
Right.
The only difference really is that for some people, they say, no, the principles we should abide by are these loftier principles, and we find someone who does this, we find someone who talks like this, we find someone who does that, and so on. And if you don't, then your personality politics.
Right.
So I guess it's a matter of perspective, and I've learned that the people that normally, especially in debate propositions, are singled out as being the negative case.
Right.
They actually vote on the basis of principle.
Okay.
It's just that we have different principles, So and whether or not a vote is about someone's personality depends on who's characterizing it.
Right.
Again, I wouldn't. There was a time when I would say that people who voted for an artista were voting on the basis of personality. But ever since I started working for the COMELEC and being more exposed to these people, and I've been talking to them and I've been asking them, why did you vote for this particular actor?
Right.
Kasi nagpunta yan dito sa amin, nagbigay sa amin ng ganito, tinulungan kami. Yung anak ko na lumpo, binigyan ng wheelchair.
And they actually felt the impact on their lives.
They felt the impact on their lives. And again, like I said, that's as principle-based as anything.
Right.
It's just that different principles.
So this argument, sir, we could say is a matter of privilege for some people.
Yes, it's a matter of perspective and privilege. So, nga, no? Yeah, that's a proper case use case for check your privilege. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Totoo yan. So again, where does this leave us? It's unsatisfying kasi to leave it there. To say that, it's a matter of perspective, it's a matter of privilege. So where does this leave us? How do we uplift our elections? I think the answer is in our politicians.
Okay.
The problem kasi with the politician is that if I give someone something, then the person who receives it sees me as generous. But if I give someone something and then I'm okay na kasi nanalo na ako, and I do all of the kabalustagan whatever,
okay,
then I'm taking advantage of that.
Okay, yeah.
And I'm tying that person to the false idea that my generosity makes me a good person. It makes me, when in fact, by taking advantage of my generosity, getting your vote, putting me in a position where I can get more for myself,
Right.
I am actually demolishing the underpinning of that impulse, right? I am presenting you with a lie, essentially.
Right.
And that is the politician's problem. Not the voter's
Manipulating
problem.
the voter.
Manipulating the voter. And that's where we should concentrate our efforts. Change the way the politicians think. Make the politicians less manipulative. Make the politicians less predatory. And you'll end up with a good government later on. Because ultimately, again, people will vote for the people that make them happy.
Right.
And if I cynically use the good vibes between us to get more money for myself, then that's on me, not on the voter.
Correct. So moving on to something more actionable, I guess, for
Sure.
the youth these days. As voters registration opens very soon, August 1,
1.
can you tell us everything basically the youth needs to know about registering to vote this August 1 to September 30?
That's a lot. I've been making lists of
Just like how,
things that
I guess
they
maybe
do,
like
right?
how they should go
Sure,
about it.
no problem. If you're a first-time voter, let's say you're 15 to 17 or 18 and above, you're a first-time voter. What you need to do is you need to come to the COMELEC office or to the Satellite Registration Center. We have both. And present yourself for registration. Again, if you're a new registrant. You have to
sir,
bring
this is
a
the COMELEC office in their city?
in their city, yes,
Okay.
in their city or municipality. Walang registration sa main office, ha? So you have to go to the office in your city or municipality or in the Satellite Registration Center there and present valid ID. Okay? Valid ID means basically company ID, school ID, a library card if it's for the current year. That's accepted. Ang hindi accepted ay barangay clearance. Okay? Barangay clearance, police clearance. Not accepted because in the past we've seen instances where the barangay would refuse issuing a clearance to someone that they felt would be their opponent.
Okay.
So, hindi siya reliable. So, ganong klaseng ID lang. Employment ID, school ID, etc. Unless you're registering for the SK, a birth certificate doesn't really help. Okay, but if you're running for SK, you need to prove your age.
Okay.
So then you need your birth certificate. The birth certificate has to be from the PSA.
Okay.
Registration is from 8 in the morning until 5 in the afternoon most days.
No lunch break, sir?
No lunch break yan, and it's until Saturday, no
Okay.
Sundays. we are open even on holidays.
Okay.
Now, when we come to the end, hindi tayo umaabot talaga ng hanggang alas 5 ng pagtanggap ng aplikante. Usually nagka-cut off yan earlier, no? Ang dahilan dyan is because the machines that are being used for registration, there's some processing time involved.
Right.
So if we accept everyone until 5 in the afternoon, processing time means you go on operating until around 1 in the morning.
So better to register early. Sir.
Register early. You will be asked to fill out a form. I-interviewin kayo, aalamin kung talagang dun ba kayo nakatira sa address na binigay ninyo.
Right.
And then kukunin yung biometrics ninyo. Ano yung biometrics? Yung pirma, yung fingerprint, at yung litrato ninyo. No? Meron tayong isang makina dyan, yung ating voter registration machine, na uupo kayo sa harapan nun at gagawin na lahat sa inyo yun. Make sure na magpa-biometrics kayo. Pag wala kayong biometrics, hindi matatapos ang inyong registration, hindi kayo marerehistro.
Right.
After you've done everything, bibigyan kayo ng tinatawag nating acknowledgement receipt. Itong acknowledgement receipt ay patunay na dumaan ka sa proseso. Ngayon, pagkatapos mo ba lumabas ng registration center, botante ka na? Hindi pa. Yung application mo dadaan pa yan sa Election Registration Board. Once every 3 months, nagmi-meeting yung board para aprubahan o i-disapprove yung mga application. Only pag na-approve ka dun sa board na yon, dun ka lang masasabi yung registered voter.
Thank you, sir, for that. I feel like a lot of our listeners right now may not be registered voters, and that would be super helpful for them. And moving on to the last part of our podcast, there is a call to action, something we do every episode because the end goal of at the end of the day, this podcast is to mobilize the youth. And my first question would be, in terms of the COMELEC, doing some self-assessment, what still needs to be done that isn't currently being worked on or isn't in progress yet to further promote voters education, and then next increase voters registration, and lastly to ensure, I guess, a smoother election come 2022, something that's currently not even in the works yet.
The holy grail of voter education is inclusion in the curriculum of schools.
Okay.
It is not included in the curriculum of schools. There was supposed to be a section on civic education, yung dating tinatawag naming araling panlipunan,
Right.
but it's not meeting the requirements for voter education, and that's sad because every year kids all over the country, they vote for class officers.
Yeah.
But for them, it's a joke almost.
Yeah.
You know, when that's a ready-made opportunity to start educating them about living in a democracy. So that's something that needs to be done. Second, for the broader picture, we have a lot of election laws that need updating.
Okay.
A lot. Time limits, for instance, should either be scrapped or political advertisements should be banned again.
Right.
There was a time when political advertisements were banned, and so it's time to re-examine the wisdom of that, considering how we are inundated by ads during election season. We should talk about how to better police the expenses of candidates. In the last elections, candidates were spending hundreds of millions before they were even required to report any expenditure. So in the end, a lot of their reported expenditures come under the wire in terms of what's allowed to spend. But if you're being painfully frank about it, all of them exceeded that by their pre-election spending. No? So we need to tighten that up considerably. There's a lot of things to be done in terms of legislation being enacted. Premature campaigning is one thing. We need to improve the way the party list systems are governed, and we need to make sure that protections are in place to prevent dynasties from forming. Finally, with regard specifically to the upcoming barangay elections, I'm sure you heard the president is in favor of postponing the barangay elections again. So that's something that puts a dampener on that democratic process. But also, I think more crucially, it means that the law that set the elections for this 2020 will be amended, which means that the entire law can now be amended, and that's keeping me up at night, because in that law is the very first concrete anti-dynasty measure this country has ever seen. So if you're opening that up to amendment, then that might be amended out of the law as well.
Right.
So that's something that bears watching.
Okay. And sir, on the other side of things, for the youth, now that voters registration is finally about to open, if the youth are truly serious about having the results go their way, whatever way that is, come 2022, what is the maximum and the minimum they should be doing as early as now to make this happen?
Minimum they should be doing is registering.
Okay.
Okay. What they can do if they want to go over and beyond is they want to start evaluating people who might be running for office,
Right.
even if it's just in their barangay. It's very easy to do this because in the barangay, people tend to talk a lot, and so alam mo na, nafe-feel mo na kung sino yung boboto dyan. Volunteer for these people. Help them get elected if you feel that they deserve to be elected.
Right. Thank you, COMELEC Spokesperson James Jimenez, for joining us on our podcast. If you like this episode, share it with a friend. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review WokeUpPH wherever you listen to your podcast. That's all for this week. We'll see you next Wednesday for a new episode of WokeUpPH. Special thanks to our graphic designers, Az Rosales and Janina David.